Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on the Cowboys' Tales we ride the stories of the West Campfire Truths Trail, dust memories, saloon whispers, gritty humans sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The first night the trailer breathed. No wind moved the pines, no crickets sang, yet the thin walls of the silver airstream trembled as if a sleeping animal was inside it, and the air itself was leaning close to listen. June Mercer turned the wick of the oil lamp and watched the flame cling to the glass. Her fingers smelled like pine resin and cold metal. Outside Black Hollow stood in a ring of dark trunks, a seam of black stitched tight around a small clearing. The sky hung low, a dull lid. She could taste rain that had not fallen. The road in had been bad. Branches clawed the aluminum skin and left long white scratches. Mud sucked at the wagon wheels until Ben and Avery climbed out to push shoes sliding breath short. The youngest three rode quiet eyes wide, wrapped in a quilt that still carried the sour trace of coal smoke from their last place. When they finally rolled onto the flattened patch by the old fire pit, the airstream settled with a long tin groan, a sound like relief or warning. Inside it smelled like damp coins and sweet sap. The floor was cold under bare feet. June cracked the windows an inch and wiped the fog with her sleeve. Glass showed the print of someone's hand left long ago, each finger ghosting down the pane. She shook the wool blanket and laid it smooth. She set the pot, the tin cups, the spoon with the notch where her husband's knife had once slipped. She did the small things that tell a room what it is. Avery, 16, and all bone and watchful eyes, found the matches and held the flame until it took. Ben stacked the cans in a line that made sense only to him. Daisy counted spoons and called each one a soldier. Kit crawled under the table and came out with a spider web in his hair like a crown. Pearl toddled from knee to knee with a button she had found in the dirt outside and said treasure in a whisper like a spell. June stepped out for air and saw it on the lowest step. Half a boot print set deep in the wet soil heel, and a half moon of soul the rest swallowed. No second print, no first. Just one clean and new pressed, like the ground had reached up to meet it. She went back in, locked the door without making a show of it, and kept her voice even. Eat, sleep. We got here. Her hands did not shake when she ladled the broth. Her breath was steady. She did not look down at the seam where the boards met. They all slept hard, except June. She lay on the narrow mattress with the lamp turned low and watched light crawl along the rivets. After a while she heard it. A polite little tap under the floor, then another, then silence. She held her breath. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap. The timing was clean like counting. Kit's eyes opened in the dim. He sat up and blinked toward the stove, his hair stuck up in 3 foolish points. He whispered without looking at her. The man under the floor said hello. June did not move. Who said that? Kit pointed at the seam along the stove where the metal tongue met the board. He said hello. Outside the pines leaned. Something in the far dark hummed a thin static thread as if an old radio somewhere had just opened one eye. She set her heel quietly on the plank that felt loose. The tapping stopped. The air settled. For a long time, nothing happened. June watched the lamp go oval, then small. She held her hand out and felt heat over glass and the faint breath of the flame on her skin. She could hear the youngest child's soft sleep, the hitch in Pearl's nose every third inhale, the wet sound of rain gathering itself out in the trees. Morning came gray. The forest had the empty look it wears before weather. June took the pail to the creek. The water was black where it ran over stones, and the smell of the bank was iron and moss, the kind that sits in the back of your throat. Avery wrung shirts until her knuckles went white, and Daisy sang to the minnows, and Ben threw a flat rock and whooped when it skimmed twice. Boots crunched behind them. A man stood just off the path in a green coat that matched the pine's brim low chin, unshaven. Ranger, she thought before she saw the patch. He did not reach for the badge on his chest. He kept his hands loose palms empty. State Preserve, he said. Nobody is supposed to be camped here. June dipped the pail without looking up. Nowhere else lets 5 mouths come in for free. He took that in with his eyes and his silence. He looked past her toward the clearing and the thin cigarette of smoke from the Airstream stovepipe. Rain will come and chew that roof. The seam will pull if it gets a big wind. He squinted as if listening not to her, not to his own voice, but to the ground. Hear that? I hear water, she said. He tilted his head. Ground is holding its breath. He set a small canvas sack on the stump without ceremony. Cornmeal, beans, salt. For the kids. I didn't ask. He was already backing away. You didn't. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat in something that was not quite a salute. Ethan Rourke. He said it like a fact, not an invitation. He moved off between the trunks and was swallowed by the straight green lines. They ate cornbread at noon, and the buttered edges stuck to Pearl's lips and made her giggle. It felt almost like a day in a life that made sense. June fixed the rear window with a strip of tape that did not want to hold and checked the trailer hook twice. She kept her hands working until the sky changed from dull to darker. At dusk, she took her place on the step with the mug cooling in her hands. The clearing went copper, then gray. It smelled like rain that had stalled. Her legs were sore in that good way that says a body is still useful. She was tired enough to let her shoulders rest. Her heel struck something that was not wood. She moved the toe of her boot and scraped away needles and mud. A boot lay there half buried like it had grown from the clay. Leather cracked but not rotten. Lace frayed but whole. She turned it over. The sole was firm, fresh mud clinging to the heel like a lick. Her mouth went dry. She checked the trees not because she thought anyone would stand and watch in daylight, but because you look. No one stood there. She carried the boot to the edge of the clearing and set it under the lip of the porch. When she went back inside, the lamp made a clean cone on the table. The kids were drawing with a stub of pencil on the back of an envelope, making a map of what they could see. After dark, the quiet changed again. It was not the hush that brings sleep. It was the kind that holds you by the sleeve. Rain had not yet decided what to do. The air inside felt colder than the air outside. The seam along the floor gave a small, hollow sound like breath. June stood up and the boards answered her feet like a second set of lungs. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap. The pattern was there, clear as if she had said it out loud. Her name came next, not a voice exactly, more like the soft crackle that a radio makes when the station drifts and a syllable rides the static. June. She did not say yes. She did not say go. She set the lamp on the floor and knelt. Heat warmed her face. She put her palm flat where the plank ran loose and the wood was cold as a coin. She pushed, and the nails lifted with a tired little squeal. The board came up easy, like something had worked it loose from below. Earth looked back at her. Dark, packed, a wet sheen on the surface where the lamp showed it. The smell came up like a fist iron and old leaves, and the closet in a mine where the air gets thin. June leaned close. The dirt pulsed. Not much, not a trick of the flame. A small, slow swell like the ground itself was taking a shallow breath. She pulled the board farther until the hole was the size of a dinner plate. She held the lamp over the gap. Light spilled down and made the damp granules of soil shine. And then, just to the left of center, a fleck of something caught and threw the light. A small, clean flash, a hard point of gleam in the dirt that should have shown nothing but black. June drew in air, steady, quiet. She opened her hand and reached toward the glint. Her fingers closed on the glint and came up with a locket oval and rusted cold enough to bite. Dirt clung to the seam. The hinge stuck, then gave with a pop that sounded too loud in the small room. Inside, a tintype face looked up from another century. The man wore a stiff collar and a mouth that did not trust a smile. On the back, under a film of rust, the letters were shallow and stubborn. R.C. June rubbed the letters with her thumb until the skin went raw. The metal smelled like a handful of pennies. She shut the locket and sat very still, the lamplight trembling on the glass. Kit snored a soft saw sound. She slid the plank back into place and pressed the nails with the heel of her hand until they bit wood again. Morning arrived with a white sky and a cold that lived in the grass. June moved through the small chores until her breath slowed. The older two hauled water. Daisy lined up the cups again and told them their ranks. The seams of the trailer sweated. In the light, the airstream showed its dents and its dulled shine, something unpretty that still held. A wagon creaked up the track that split the pines. June stepped out with her palms empty. Louise Garner leaned down from the seat, all wool and windburn, a woman who had seen every secret before it got a name. She dropped lightly to the ground and dusted her skirt like she was shaking off a thought. "Heard you came out here," Louise said. "Thought it was talk. It never is it?" June tipped her head toward the open door. "Coffee is thin. It will do." Louise took the cup and warmed her fingers on it. Her eyes moved from the roof seam to the step to the way the wind held still at the trees. She kept her voice quiet. "You find anything that did not belong to you." June set the locket on the table. She did not push it over. She did not pull it back. Louise looked down and the lines around her mouth pinched. She did not touch it. Her lips moved soundless on the letters. "RC." "You know it," June said. "Whole county does," Louise said. "Roy Cutter. Worked a little at the mine. Worked a lot at Trouble." She lifted her eyes. There was a freight that never made the trestle. Men said those bars went to ground somewhere between Black Hollow and town. Men talked about partners and who was the one that did not walk out. Men talk too much. June felt the knot pull tight at the base of her neck. The name Sam rose, and she pushed it down before it reached her mouth. The cold came up from the step and through the soles of her shoes. Louise took a small breath, and it looked like it hurt. "I would not stay," Louise said. "Not if I had a place. The ground out here remembers." June looked over Louise's shoulder into the trees, and the trees looked back. "We ran out of places." Louise set the cup down. She put her hand 1 second on June's arm, a weight and a kindness without speech, then climbed back on the bench and turned the team. The wagon rolled away until the pines swallowed it. Down by the creek, Ben spotted a piece of iron half sunk among the pebbles. He hauled it up with both hands and grinned like he had pulled a fish. "How about this?" It was a railroad spike head flattened body eaten with rust. June turned it in her fingers and felt the story in its weight. She told him to leave it by the door. Afternoon broke into wind, a steady push out of the hills. The sky went the color of old tin. Ethan Rourke came on foot, a coil of tarp under one arm and a bucket of nails swinging in the other. He did not step on the boot print on the lower stair. June watched to see if he would look. He did. He said nothing. "Roof will weep when it spits rain," he said. He climbed without asking and pinned the tarp into the seam with slow, careful strikes. Each hammer blow sounded like it traveled through the metal and down into the frame, a small bell inside the bones of the trailer. He stepped down and the boards answered with their hollow reply. He stood in the doorway and closed his eyes like a man listening at a wall. "Hear that?" June kept her face straight. "I hear you banging." "Ground is holding its breath," he said again. He did not say how he knew. He crouched and ran his fingers along the plank June had pried the night before. He felt where the nails had moved. He looked at her, not a question, not a charge, just a look. Her mouth made the shape of a warning, then shut. "If there is something, it is not on the floor anymore," she said. "It is under us." They went outside. Behind the trailer, the clearing dipped and held a bald patch where the soil looked tamped. The air smelled like iron, even without rain. Ethan set the shovel and leaned his weight. The first inch came up in black curls. June took the second shovel and found her rhythm. The dirt was damp and heavy, then suddenly lighter. A pocket of cold air washed their hands and made the hair lift on their arms. The spade hit wood, not root, board. Ethan shaved the dirt away in small, neat slides until the curve of it showed a bent plank like the lid of a chest. He worked his fingers under and lifted easy and slow. The wood came up and turned over, and the smell rose rank and sharp, a mine-mouth exhale. Inside lay a box metal gone dark, and pitted corners dented by time. A latch waited in front like a bad tooth. June wiped her palm on her skirt and reached. The latch stuck. She leaned with both hands and felt it give with a groan that dragged across the clearing. The lid creaked open. On top lay a sheriff badge from another administration, narrow star points dulled by years and smoke. Coleridge, the letters said across the center. Under the badge sat a revolver oiled once and forgotten since its walnut grip carved with 2 letters RC. The gun had the sleepy look of something that had waited longer than it should. Under that lay notebooks wrapped in a cloth that had once been white. The cloth peeled like a scab. Names lived on the first page in a small, sure hand. Dates, amounts, columns of figures that leaned toward a total. Ethan did not reach in. He took one step back and let the air move around him. His voice came low. This is not only old stories. June set the badge on her knee and felt its cold. She turned a page and another. She read a last name she knew and felt her throat close. She saw a code that looked like a map. She saw lines that had no business breathing air. Inside the trailer, Pearl laughed at something Daisy drew, and the sound came clear and clean through the thin wall. June closed the notebook and closed her eyes. For one breath, she let the dark ride over her. When she opened them, Ethan was watching the tree line. "Who knows about this place?" June said. "People with long memories," Ethan said. "People who keep quiet because quiet kept them alive." He glanced at the box. "People who make fires when paper stacks too high." A wind ran through the clearing and rattled the tarp on the roof. Somewhere beyond the pines, the derelict radio antenna by the old water tower gave a restless squeal. It had not made a sound all day. The squeal lengthened into a wire song, thin and high, a loose belt on a machine that wanted to wake. June laid the badge back in the box and set the revolver beside it. She wrapped the ledgers again and pressed the cloth flat with her open palm. She lifted the box a fraction. It was heavier than it looked. The weight moved up her arms and into her chest. Avery stepped into the doorway with her hair damp and a question on her mouth, then saw the hole and closed the question again. Her eyes slid to Ethan. He nodded once, not to her, to the room, like calling it to be still. Avery held Pearl by the hand and backed them both inside. Evening took the color out of the clearing. The light went steel, then ash. June and Ethan slid the box under the table and pulled a spare blanket over it. June set the lifted plank back and tapped the nail heads with the back of a spoon until they sat. She straightened the cups in a row that looked like defense. Her hands knew how to move when her head did not. The tower sang again, louder now, a static note that made the skin on June's arms pebble. The Airstream skin caught the sound and carried it along the walls until it found the seam and hummed there. The children went quiet without being told. June walked to the door and opened it enough to see the dark shoulder of the water tower over the treetops, a black mark against a less black sky. The sound broke and fluttered a bird that could not get through a window. In the middle of that broken note, a syllable formed quick and soft, as if the air itself learned her shape for a moment. June. The name faded back into the wire song and left the door frame vibrating under June's hand. She shut the door and slipped the lifted plank into place. The children slept close and warm, a small weather system of breath. She set the locket on the shelf and watched the lamp make a shape of its edge. The room held still until the wick guttered down to a seed and went dark. Morning came thin and colorless. June wrapped the notebooks in a dish towel and then in her old shawl. She slid the badge and the revolver into the box and tied the box with cord. Avery stood at the door with Pearl on her hip, not asking. Ben shouldered his jacket like a boy who wanted to be needed. June shook her head. "You keep the fire." She looked at Ethan, and he nodded, already reaching for his coat. Coleridge rose out of the fog in hard lines. The main street had 2 trucks, a diner with coffee that always smelled a little burned, and the sheriff's office tacked on like an afterthought. Paint peeled from the trim. A fly moved slow on the inside of the front window. Deputy Caleb Knox opened the door before June lifted her hand to knock. He had the clean look of a man who slept on a cot and woke when the town did. Mrs. Mercer Knox said, "Ranger." He stood aside and let the cold come in with them. His desk was a wood slab with gouges where someone had carved a game in it long ago. The safe sat under a photograph of a former sheriff whose eyes had not followed the times. June did not talk. She put the bundle down and untied the cord. Knox watched her hands more than her face. When the cloth peeled back and the leather covers showed his jaw flexed once. He did not touch the revolver. He lifted the badge with 2 fingers and set it back as if it might burn. "Where did you find them?" he said, voice soft to keep the room from hearing. "Under my kitchen," June said. Knox opened the first ledger and ran down a column with a blunt finger. Names, codes, sums that grew teeth if you looked at them too long. He stopped on a name that lived on the side of a company truck and closed the book as if someone might read through the glass. He took the bundle to the safe and turned the dial with steady clicks. He did it twice and then rattled the handle. The door stayed shut like a promise. "I will keep it," Knox said. He looked at June and then down at his hands. "You should go home before the weather turns." June met his eyes and saw a man standing against a door he would not be able to hold if a crowd came. She nodded and picked up the empty cloth. Ethan held the front door for her and said nothing on the walk back. His silence stayed with her like an extra shadow. By mid-afternoon, the wind pushed harder out of the hills. The Airstream roof made a soft drum under the tarp. June cooked cornmeal in the black pan and kept the children busy with small tasks that gave a rhythm to the day. Daisy lined dried leaves along the windowsill and named each one with a whisper. Ben stood the railroad spike by the door like a tiny guard. Kit fell asleep on the bench with his mouth open. Pearl curled into Avery and slid her thumb into her mouth with a sound that had soothed June once when she had nights to sleep. The siren came at dusk, not a town siren, a long raw yelp that ran up June's spine. It came again, and then a glow lifted over the trees where the road cut down into Coleridge. Orange licked the low clouds. June stepped into the yard and felt cold bite the skin under her eyes. Pine sap glittered on the trunks like glass. Boots hit the step. Ethan Rourke came out of the trees with smoke in his hair and black streaks on his cheeks. His coat smelled like wet ash. He did not need to say it, but he did. "Office is burning." June's hands closed around nothing and then found the doorframe. The word made a sound in her chest. She saw the safe and the old photograph and the pile of paper that wanted to be air. She thought of Knox standing with a bucket while the floor turned to steam under him. They watched the sky until the glow softened to a sullen red and then to a stain. Rain came late and mean. It tapped the tarp and ran down in uneven ropes. June moved the children to the back bunks and sat them with cups of water they did not drink. The trailer breathed slow and cold, a tired animal waiting for a new noise. It came with boots in the leaves, not the ranger's step. A drag every few strides like weight pulled wrong on a shoulder. The front yard held a little light still from the wet sky. June opened the door an inch. A man stood by the pine where the ground sloped down, hat brim, low coat torn at one sleeve. His face had the color of a wall that had never seen sun. A scar cut his jaw and pulled the corner of his mouth into a shape that was almost a smile and not. "June Mercer," he said. The voice had dust in it. "You have something of mine." The locket was a coin in her pocket. The revolver was wrapped in the box under the table. The smell that rode in with him was stale whiskey and wet wool, and the metal scent June knew too well now. Roy Cutter, Ethan said from the dark edge of the yard. He had not raised his rifle. He had not moved into the light either. Cutter's eyes flicked once and then came back to June. He stood easy for a man who had bled. "That box you pulled. That is where the rest of it starts." He looked at the trailer door and at the figure of a child moving inside behind the curtain. "Bring it out." June stepped so the door was at her back, her shoulder against it. She felt Pearl's fingers find the top of her boot through the wood. "You need a doctor," June said. It came out as even as she could make it. "I need what I am owed," Cutter said. He lifted his hand and showed the gun a twin to the one in the box, but cleaner. He did not point it at her first. He pointed it at the door. June moved. Not much. Just enough to make the barrel have to choose. Cutter's eyes shifted to the right a hair. The barrel came to her. She let her breath go out so slow it did not fog the air. "Ethan," she said without turning her head the way a person says a password. Cutter smiled with the wrong side of his mouth. "The boy you had in the mind," June said, the words choosing themselves. He did not run. He stayed and pushed men out. Cutter's eyes flashed something that looked like surprise first, then contempt. He made his mouth into the start of a word. The rifle cracked. The report rolled up the trunks. Cutter jerked. His coat bloomed dark at the shoulder, and he stumbled back one step. He did not drop the gun. He swung toward the tree line and fired wild. Bark spit off a trunk. Birds failed to fly. Ethan moved left into deeper shadow. Cutter fired again, and the second shot took a chunk of the stair. Wood splinters pattered onto June's shins. She held the door with one hand and lifted the other where Cutter could see it. "Enough," June said. The steadiness in her voice surprised her enough to make her swallow. Cutter blinked rain out of his eyes. He took 2 long breaths, like a runner who had lost the rhythm, and then he did what men do who want to live. He limped into the trees on a path that did not exist until his boots made it. His shoulder left a dark brushstroke on a low branch. Ethan did not fire again. June listened to the sound of Cutter going until it was only rain. Inside, Avery had the baby in her lap, and Daisy had both hands pressed flat to the table as if it might jump. Ben stood like a pin straight and still, eyes wide and bright. The room smelled like gunpowder and pine and wet metal. June closed the door and slid the latch with a click that felt very small. The floor answered, not with breath, with knocking. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, closer than before under the stove, right where Kit had pointed with his foolish hair and his solemn finger. The pattern held to itself. The trailer skin hummed with the afters of the shot, and with the fitful noise from the water tower. The tower's static rose and fell, as if searching for a station it knew once and could not find again. June set the lamp on the floor and knelt by the loose board. She did not pry it up. Her hand rested on the wood and felt the cold speak through it. Ethan came in and leaned the rifle in the corner. He did not wipe the soot from his face. They ate the ends of the cornbread and did not taste them. Avery tucked the little ones in and did not sing. Ben sat on the step with the spike across his knees and watched the yard like it might speak a warning if you stared hard enough. Ethan fixed the doorframe with 2 screws he had in his pocket and then stood with his shoulder near June's without touching. Near midnight, the tower found a new voice. The old antenna spun and made a clean keen that lifted the hair on June's arms. The sound slid down the slope and under the trailer and pooled there. June felt it come up through the floorboards and into her bones. A shallow tremor ran through the ground and made the cups chime on the shelf. Rain deepened. Lightning showed the shoulder of the water tower black against black. In that quick white flash, June saw the base of the structure where the concrete had cracked and slumped. She saw mud lifted into a low berm by old floodwater. She saw something pale under the skin of the earth at the edge of the berm. Not bone, not stone. A corner of metal grit slick showing itself a thumb's width, then hiding again under the next hard drum of rain. The next flash of lightning set the window white. June held the vision it gave her, the pale corner of metal near the water tower's footing, the cracked concrete, the berm of old flood silt. The tower's voice climbed into a thin, steady keen that ran along the roof seam and trembled the spoons. Ethan set his palm on the table and looked at her. His face was a map of soot and rain. The rifle leaned by the door. He reached for it and checked the chamber with a click that sounded too loud in the little room. "I will go," he said. June took her coat and slid her arms in. The sleeve stuck at her wrist and she yanked it free. "I am coming." He looked like he might say no and then did not. He tied the tarp tighter over the door with 2 quick knots and pushed the latch into place. Avery stood in the passage and nodded as if they had spoken. Ben lifted the railroad spike and set it lengthwise on the window ledge. Daisy gathered Pearl close and pressed their foreheads together until both girls stopped shaking. June touched each head and felt the heat of their hair on her palms. The rain hit in cold sheets when they stepped out. It ran down June's collar and along her spine. The clearing that held the trailer had turned slick and dark. The smell of iron was everywhere. Ethan moved at a hunter's pace, quiet, careful, choosing ground that would not give. June followed in his steps and kept breath low and steady. The antenna on the tower spun slow, a black arm against a worse sky, the noise of it like a wire pulled too tight. They took the old rail bed, 2 long grooves under grass and cinders that remembered weight. The spike back at the trailer felt like a cousin to all the iron under their feet. Wind pushed the rain sideways. The pines moved like a single animal, a dark flank bending. Mud reached for their boots and let go with a wet kiss. Bell's Ridge rose out of the trees with a hard line. The tower stood on concrete feet that had settled wrong. One foot had slumped and taken the ladder with it, so the rungs hung crooked. At the base where the berm curved like a shoulder, something square caught the next flash and winked. It was the same hard gleam she had seen from the trailer. A corner of a buried box lay there, grit and rain hurrying over it. He was already there. Roy Cutter stood an arm's length from the box hat gone hair plastered to his skull. His coat stuck to his chest, and the shoulder was dark and wet. His mouth held that lopsided grin that was not a grin. His gun was in his good hand. The other arm hung heavy. "Should have left me to the ground," he said. His voice sounded like a shovel on rocks. "Then none of this has to talk." Ethan lifted the rifle and did not shout a warning. June took 3 steps left and felt the mud shift under her heel. Cutter's eyes flicked to follow her. The corner of the box showed again when a rope of rain cut a new groove. The tower's keen skipped and came back. "You know this place?" June said. Her throat tasted metal. "You made it a vault." Cutter laughed and coughed water. "Vault." He looked up at the black ribs of the tower and then down at the berm where the box lay. He nudged the mud with his boot. The corner blinked. "I made it simple. People stop looking when ground keeps a secret. People stop asking when paper burns." Ethan fired. The shot cracked off the tower and came back once like a thrown plate. Cutter jerked, stumbled, and caught himself. He swung the pistol and sent a round into the ladder. Rust leaped in a bright spray. June ducked and the shot hit the berm behind her with a thud that felt like a hand on her back. She straightened and caught Cutter's eye and held it. "Sam stayed," she said. The water ran down her lips and into her mouth. He did not run. Cutter did not like the name in her mouth. He set his jaw so the scar made his grin look wronger. He fired once at Ethan and missed the bullet, winding up into the wet metal of the tower. Ethan rolled into a low wedge of rock and came up on one knee. He leveled the rifle and steadied it with his breath. Lightning put them all into a silver photograph. 3 bodies, 1 box, the black bones of the tower over them. The picture burned out. Darkness slammed back in. June saw the after image where her eyes had been and walked into it like it could be a path. Cutter shot again. The round tore a splinter off the box corner and sent a sting of rust into June's cheek. She tasted grit. She did not slow. Ethan's next shot took Cutter full in his bad shoulder. He spun and went to a knee. The pistol came up a last time and found June by the shape of her breath. She moved right. The bullet passed left of her hip and tore mud into a fan. She felt the heat at the edge of it and added that heat to the one she already carried. The ground under her heel gave an inch and then held. Rain slapped her eyes. She lifted her palm and Cutter watched that small movement for 1 second because people look at hands. Ethan used that second. His round hit center. Cutter put a hand to his chest, as if surprised that it was his. He took 2 backward steps that looked like a dance done by a man who had never learned it. He hit the berm and slid and sat. The tower's keen went thin and far. He tried to lift the pistol again. The hand did not listen. He looked up at the wheel of the antenna and down at the box and then at June. Water moved across his face in clean lines and made him look younger for the length of a blink. He fell sideways. The gun dropped. The mud took it with a soft kiss. His breath rattled once and hung in the rain like steam, and then thinned and went. The tower sang its single note until a gust broke it and the sound fell in pieces around them. The box lay with its corner naked. June stepped into the berm and felt the water suck at her ankles. She knelt and dug with her hands. The mud was cold and slick. Her nails filled with grit. She cleared the lid edge and found the latch with 2 fingers and pulled. It came up stubborn and then open. Gold sat inside and did nothing. It caught light and made light back. It was heavy even when it did not move. It made her face look old in the small mirror of it. All the stories that had walked through kitchens on slow afternoons and into bars at closing time had been about this quiet metal in a square hole. June looked over her shoulder. Ethan had the rifle down. He did not speak. Rain beat on his hat and ran off his jaw. He watched her hands and not her face. June breathed once through her mouth to clear the smell of mud and metal. She put both palms into the wet dirt and pushed it back into the box. She covered the first bar and then the second. Her fingers left streaks. She took a double handful of clay and packed it down until the gleam went dull and then went away. She smoothed the top and dragged more from the berm. The water tried to pull it all back out. She kept pushing until the lid could close on dirt and weight. She shut the box. She set her body weight on it and felt the hinge seat. She pushed mud over the lid again. She did not look at Ethan. She looked at her hands. They were brown to the wrist. They shook and then stopped shaking. She stood and wiped them on the wet grass, and the grass took what it could. Ethan bent and picked up the pistol that had fallen. He dropped the magazine out of habit and set both pieces on a flat stone. He went to Cutter and closed his eyes with 2 fingers, and then kept his hand there a second longer. His face did not change. Sirens began somewhere down in the valley. They climbed the road in a slow coil and found the ridgeline and came toward the tower. The sound spread and thinned and changed as the wind moved it. June heard a truck engine under the siren for a moment, and then the rain took the engine away. The 2 of them stood and took the air that was there. The antenna spun once more, and then the wind found a new angle and held it still. The keen faded to a small shiver in the metal, and then to quiet. The tower was only a shape again. The hill was only a hill. The rain owned everything it touched. They walked back the way they had come, with the storm rolling on their shoulders. The old railbed felt softer. The pines closed and opened around them. Water ran in little rivers across the path and found their socks and made their feet heavy. They said nothing. The trailer glow was a smudge between trunks that swayed. Avery had the door unlatched before they reached the steps. She did not rush them with words. She stepped back and let the room make its space. June moved inside and took the wet from her body where she could. Ethan leaned the rifle in its corner and set the broken pistol in a drawer behind a pan. The children watched without sound, eyes bright cheeks streaked clean with the salt of earlier tears. June checked the little ones with her hands like a nurse. She wiped rain off Kit's hair and felt the soft weight of it and the heat of his scalp. She set the kettle, and the click of the metal on the ring sounded like a thing a person can count on. The floor held still, no tapping under the stove, no breath through the seam. The trailer did not hum at the edges anymore. The old antenna found its rest and did not sing. The tower's voice did not fetch their walls. Outside, the siren swelled and passed and slid away down the road toward the ridge. Inside, the lamp pulled a small circle out of the air and set it on the table. June put her hand flat on the plank she had lifted that first night and felt it cool and quiet under her palm. The wood gave nothing back. The room listened to the rain and nothing else. Morning laid a pale ribbon across the pines. Water hung from every needle and dropped without sound. The tower on Bell's Ridge stood quiet. No whine, no wire song. The metal looked like bone that had remembered how to rest. Trucks came up the rutted road in low gear. Men stepped out in slickers that shone like fish skin. Deputy Caleb Knox rode in the lead truck hat, dark with rain at the brim. He took everything in with one quick look. The angle of the ladder, the slump of the concrete foot, the disturbed berm the body covered under a tarp. He met June and Ethan in the clearing. No greeting. He did not ask what they had seen. He already knew enough by the set of June's shoulders and the mud ground into the creases of her hands. He tipped his head toward the ridge. "We have it," Knox said. "No one is coming up to bother you." June nodded once and kept her eyes on his. The smell of last night still sat in her hair, gunpowder and wet metal. Ethan stood just back of her and held that silence men use when the next words belonged to someone else. A sharp-faced deputy started to say something about trespass and permits. Knox did not look at him. He looked at June. His voice stayed mild. "Not today." The men went to work along the road. They took photographs of the tower and of the marks in the mud where a body had gone down. They put a tagged ribbon on the pistol Ethan had left on the stone. They folded the tarp and left nothing under it. Knox signed 2 different papers on the hood of the truck and slid them into a folder that had seen rain before. He walked the yard without stepping on any old prints and stopped at the bottom step. The lower stair still showed the half moon from the first day. He bent and touched the edge of that print with one knuckle, like a man checking a door he knows is locked. He straightened and looked at the trailer. "You will be safe here," he said. For now then he added after a breath and longer than that. His eyes moved to Ethan. "Keep an eye on them." "Always," Ethan said. Knox's mouth made a shape that could have been a smile in a different town. He climbed into the truck, and the convoy dropped out of the pines, the way it came slow, careful, all that rain rinsing the sound away. The day ran on without hurry. June scrubbed the steps with a stiff brush until the wood came up clean and pale. The brush bit the skin off her knuckles, and she did not mind. Avery set the line and hung shirts that would take all afternoon to dry. Ben found a straight limb and trimmed it with a pocket knife until it made a decent pole for the tarp edge. Daisy sorted spoons by shine. Kit knocked a rhythm on the table with a spoon and managed not to break it. Pearl followed June in small steps and dragged a rag behind her like a pet. Ethan fixed what he could with what he had. He squared the door frame where a bullet had chewed it. He pulled a new line across the roof to keep the tarp from lifting. He checked the seams on the windows and found the whistle that had been keeping June awake and killed it with a dab of pitch. He did it with his jaw set and his eyes soft, a man who had chosen to be needed. The air changed under the trees. The sharp taste of iron went out of it. The sweet of pine came forward. By noon the sun shouldered through and turned every drop into small fire. A hawk scraped a line across the sky. The antenna on the water tower found a still place and held it. Louise Garner appeared in the heat of the afternoon with a basket on her hip. She set it on the table without fuss, bread that smelled of corn and a jar of apple butter that already wore its own light. She looked at June and said nothing for a long count. Then she reached and set her hand on June's forearm, like a hinge that needed oil, and the oil had come. "You built a home out of this," Louise said. The words did not try to explain more than they could. June cut the bread and passed slices that steamed in the shade. The children ate like they had not just eaten. Louise sat for a cup and named off the kind of talk that keeps a town alive, who drove a new truck in from 3 counties over, whose nephew threw a rock through a church window and was now mending the pane by hand, which ridge had mushrooms, and which creek had leeches this season. She said the last thing in a low voice. "They will put it in the book as justice served. That is enough for the page." June nodded and did not look away this time. Louise rose and hitched the basket up and left with the light catch in her step that women use when they are carrying more than food. Evening came clean. The children had dirt up to their elbows. Avery laughed at Kit, and Kit took it like a prince. Ben tried the coffee and made a face and poured half of it back, and the rest of it missed the cup. Ethan took the spill without a word and sat him on the step with a towel and a promise that tasted like a joke and a permission. The floor was quiet. June touched the plank she had lifted the first night, and it gave her nothing, not breath, not rhythm. The stillness had changed from something held to something granted. She listened for the soft wire voice that had made her name out of static and found only wind in the needles. She slept that night with 2 blankets and woke once at an hour that used to be for fear and did not find it. A week later, Knox came back alone in a county jeep that rattled at a certain speed like a man walking with keys. He stepped out clean and rested. He had a paper under his arm and a pen already clicked open. He stood at the base of the step and cleared his throat because some things deserve a small ceremony, even if you cannot afford a big one. The sheriff did not make a habit of this, Knox said. He ran a thumb along the edge of the paper. The state likes its lines straight and its forms full. But this corner is not useful for anyone but the person who has use for it. He handed the paper over. The print read like a person who had never expected to own anything needed to read it and still would like to. A seal sat in the bottom corner and made the whole thing official, even if it ought not to be. June held the page in both hands and felt the grain of the paper like a living thing. Avery stood on her toes to see. Ben ran a finger under each line like he was checking the math. Daisy tried to hold the seal up to the light. Kit and Pearl reached at the same time and touched the lower edge together, as if they had rehearsed. Knox signed where the last signature belonged. He tipped his hat to Ethan and to June and turned to go, then turned back. He looked at the trees. "Keep your noise small," he said to the forest as if it might listen. He got in the Jeep and took the bend with one tire off the dirt onto grass out of respect for the rut that had taken too much already. Ethan built a lean-to near the creek from boards he scavenged off a shed that nobody wanted. It had a roof that a storm could not easily lift. He slept there some nights with the radio off, and some nights on the floor under the table when Pearl had fever, or when June needed another body to keep the air inside honest. He did not say the word stay. He stayed. The children resumed the business of being loud. They argued about who got the yellow cup. They found a turtle and named it Sheriff and put it back when its patience ran out. Avery grew quiet in a way that looked like strength instead of sorrow. Ben started measuring everything with a length of string, the table, the window, his arm, because numbers kept their own kind of weather. Daisy sang at the sink and made up verses that sometimes rhymed and sometimes did not. Kit learned what nails sound like when they find the stud. Pearl learned to say Ethan in a way that made him rub the back of his neck and look at the ceiling. On the patch of earth below the porch, small flowers came up where the mud had been worked and smoothed. They were not planted. They arrived because the soil had space for them again. June knelt and tipped a bit of water from a cup to the base of one and pressed the dirt gentle. Daisy said it was a gift from the ground, and no one laughed. By late afternoon, the airstream had a glow down one long side. It caught the low sun and turned it into a soft bar that slid along the metal as the light moved. The tarp no longer snapped at a seam. The radio tower on the ridge threw a black shape that did not hum. The old spike by the door had dried to a harmless brown and leaned like a thing that had lost its job and did not mind. June stood on the top step with her hand on the doorframe. Ethan came up beside her and did not speak. Their shoulders touched. The scent of cornbread came through the square of the open window. A pot clucked on the stove. The girls laughed over some private mischief, and Ben told them to keep it down with a voice that tried to sound like a man's, and did not quite. June looked out at the thin run of creek and the stands of pine and the iron-rich earth that had taken so much and was now giving back in the small ways it knows how. She set her palm on the plank she had lifted and closed her eyes. The wood felt cool and inert. The quiet inside the trailer was not a held breath anymore. It was the regular rise and fall of a chest. The room had a pulse, and she knew it. Night took the edges off the clearing and left the center warm. Fireflies came low like slow sparks from a private forge. An owl moved somewhere above the line where the branches made a woven ceiling. June turned the wick down and let the flame settle in its glass. She stepped outside and let the dark find the shape of her before she took her place on the step. The forest exhaled. The sound went out through the needles and over the roof and into the open pocket of sky. It was not a secret. It was air moving through a place that could bear it. June sat with her hands in her lap and listened to the steady work of a house. She listened to the hush where the tapping had lived. She listened to the river of insects and to the soft drag of the creek over stone. She watched the silver side of the trailer take the starlight and make it its own. She stayed there until the cool came up and laid itself across her shoulders like an old friend. Then she went inside and shut the door, and the room kept breathing. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.